77, Dulles to Los Angeles. American Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles. This, American says, is one of the planes that crashed into one of the World Trade Center buildings. United Flight 175, Dulles to Los Angeles was hijacked. United Flight 93, Newark to San Francisco was hijacked. Those are the flights. If you have questions about this and you need to contact one of the airlines if you're concerned about passengers on these flights. This now back to live picture. Police say casualties could number in the thousands. Let us take you back now. We're going to show you on videotape the key sequence of events. This, again, is not a graphic. This is an actual photograph of the plane crashing into one of the World Trade Center towers. Flames shoot out of the opposite side of the building. And then, a short while later, one of the towers began collapsing. The prayer was it was only part of the building collapsing, but it turned out to be the whole building comes down. Raining debris in a wide area below it. And this harsh fact we had only had time to absorb it when the second tower began to collapse. First one plane hit a World Trade Center tower, then another plane hit the other tower. One tower collapses and the other collapses. Carol Marine, our CBS News correspondent based in Chicago, is just back from this part of New York City. Carol?
Dan, I think I was in the second collapse or an explosion right after that because I was trying to make my way around Stuyvesant High School. I believe that's correct. I'm not a New Yorker. But I was coming toward the World Trade Center looking for CBS crews and asked a firefighter if he saw any. He told me to walk down the middle of the road. All of a sudden, there was a roll, an explosion, and we could see coming at us a ball of flame stories high. He and others screamed, "Run," and I ran. I fell. One of them picked me up. We ran as fast as we could, and then he threw me into the wall of a building and covered me. Forgive me. I am in his debt. You know, Dan, I know firefighters do incredible work all of the time, but this was exceeded anything that I can imagine. He threw me into a wall, covered me with his body. I could feel his heart banging against my back. We were both so sure we were going to die. The flame somehow stopped short of us. But whatever collapsed created, and you saw it in some of that video, Dan, a rain of cinders so thick that you couldn't see this far in front of you and you couldn't breathe. A police officer, and I wish I knew the firefighter's name, a police officer by the name of Brendan Duke grabbed my hand, and he and I tried to find our way through it until we could hit a clearing in the light. What you're seeing on the ground here, Dan, was in the air, and you couldn't see. And again, we thought we were finished. We somehow got to the light. Another firefighter gave me his mask for a moment so I could breathe. And then I made my way somehow through the smoke into the light to our crews. There was a cameraman there whose head was bloody, and he was trying to shoot and set up some of these shots there. The firefighters, the police, the crews, the people streamed toward me as I made my way to the Trade Center, sobbing and crying and trying to call home on dead cell phones, but they couldn't get through. There is so much fear out there even now because of gas main leaks. There was a point at which I watched firefighters run. Someone threw me forward. A paramedic truck let me jump inside and drove me halfway, and then a New York City bus driver opened his doors of an empty bus and drove me here to the broadcast center. To all of them, I mean, citizens of New York and have remained amazingly calm but deeply frightened.
CBS News correspondent Carol Marine, still covered with the smoke and pieces of the debris. Stick with us here, Carol. I want to repeat that New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani now says, and this is a direct quote, "There have been a tremendous number of lives lost." Certainly no one at this early hour can know how many lives have been lost. But it's impossible to watch the pictures of both of the World Trade Centers collapsing. Keep in mind, these buildings were 110 stories in height each, with 50,000 plus people generally working there on a weekday, which this, of course, is. So when the mayor of New York says there's been a tremendous number of lives lost, there's no question that it is true. Carol Maureen, did you see any bodies? Did you see anyone that you said to yourself, that person is dead?
I saw people on stretchers that I was certain were dead. I saw firefighters and paramedics going into buildings where they themselves had to wonder if they were coming out. But there were a surprising number of people ambulatory and making their way out. I saw much more of that than I saw actual carnage. The concern that I heard from police and fire was that the people who were dead didn't make their way out of those towers, that most of the death is contained within those buildings.
And perhaps some people still alive inside the building. That frequently happens when by earthquake or something else there's been a collapse such as this. But mark it, this is unprecedented. There has never been anything like this. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Centers collapsing, 4 airplanes hijacked within the space of an hour and a half or 2 hours, an apparent attack by air, plane crashing near Camp David. Details on that are still sketchy, and there's some question as to if a plane crashed there, how close it actually got to Camp David. President Bush on his way, presumably back to Washington. The White House has air fighter cover and has had such since the first reports of the World Trade Center attacks. President Bush says it's an apparent terrorist attack. It's clear that one of the suspects in this is the worldwide, what has been described as the worldwide terrorist network of Osama bin Laden. However, let us mark well that nobody knows who's responsible for these apparently coordinated attacks on selected targets in America today. That out of London, a Saudi dissident who is connected with Osama bin Laden pointed out today, this is Mr. Abdel Bari Atwan, editor of a London-based Arabic newspaper, said, and I quote him, Islamic fundamentalists led by bin Laden were, quote, almost certainly behind the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. This is this one man's opinion. This man, who is well connected with Osama bin Laden, says it is most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests in an unprecedented attack, a very big one. Atwan told Reuters, and he said that he personally received information that Osama bin Laden was planning very, very big attacks against American interests, unquote. Now, those are the quotes of one man in London. We want to underscore, italicize, put in all caps, nobody knows who's responsible for these attacks. Osama bin Laden gets blamed for almost everything in the way of this kind of attack around the world. There's been considerable controversy and debate in the upper reaches of Western diplomacy and intelligence agencies about whether he alone is capable of pulling off these kinds of attacks. But all of that will be for later to sort out. Clearly, someone had coordinated attacks on these selected targets. Byron Pitts, our CBS News correspondent, is on the telephone from the tip of Manhattan.